Welcome everyone today to our Timelines for Genealogy class. Our speaker today is Sandra Williams Bush. She's a storyteller, genealogist, and retired librarian. She's a member of several genealogy and historical societies, including the Buffalo Genealogical Society of the African Diaspora, BIGZAD, and the Afro-American Historical Association of the Niagara Frontier. Some of her researched family stories are included in the book Kindred Stories, Genealogy and Family Histories by BIGZAD members. She also has an essay in the book Black Homesteaders of the South, compiled by Bernice Alexandra Bennett. In 2023, Sandra was accepted into the Lineage Society, Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. Sandra chronicles her family history research in her blog, Ancestor Callings, Georgia and Mississippi Roots. Go ahead, Sandra.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Rhonda. Oh, there it is. Share. I want to take my face off. Stop the video. Move some stuff around so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, I want to thank Rhonda and the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library for giving me this opportunity to share my passion, which is genealogy. As she said, the title of this webinar is Creating Timelines to Aid Genealogy Research. And below is my contact information, my email, and my blog. An overview of what I will be presenting is just a brief look at records and documents. What is a timeline? Why make a timeline? What to include in a timeline? And then I will show some examples of timelines that I've done, summary, and then open it up for questions. Now, from the time we are born until way after we die, there are records on us, all types of records. When we do genealogy research, we first focus on birth, death, and marriage records to verify our ancestors' existence. But as we go further, there are other records to look at: education, military, memberships to all types of groups, civic organizations, social organizations, religious. So there are all types of records that follow us around. Now, birth, death, and marriage records, like I said, are the big three. Records can be found in a number of places, including census records, federal and state, newspapers, directories, funeral homes and cemeteries, archives, libraries, historical societies, courts on all levels from local to federal, social organizations, churches, family Bibles. Usually whoever has a family Bible isn't going to let you take it for anything, for any reason. Thank goodness now we have cell phones that can take pictures of family Bibles. And in attics, basements, and closets, any place around the house, you might find a box of something related to genealogy. And wherever you find the records, always document your sources. I know I'm not the only one that has come across a record that I found years ago, and I look at it and I say, now where did I get this? Because I didn't document the source. So always document your sources. A timeline is a chronological account of a person, place, or event that has a start date and an end date. Why make them? It organizes everything at a glance. Like I say, we all have piles of paper all over. So if you take these piles and you're working on one ancestor story, it organizes those papers. Timeline helps you fill in an ancestor story because they are more than just birth, marriage, and death. You can see gaps in when you're researching an ancestor. If you have a 15, 20-year gap, when you're doing a timeline, then you know you need to look at other sources and dig deeper. It places an ancestor's life in historical context. Just like we don't live in a vacuum, our ancestors didn't live in a vacuum. Timelines provide new discoveries and helps with big brick walls. Because once you find something and have that aha moment, it can push you into looking at other record sets. It can help solve problems with inconsistencies with the same names, birth dates, because a person sometimes, when you're looking especially at ancestry trees and public trees and stuff, people will have wrong people attached with the same name, same birthday, same place. But a timeline will break all that down. And as I said, it can point you to new records. You can start putting together a timeline with pen and paper, but after a while it might get kind of messy because you want to put in other facts as you find them. So a computer Word document program, an Excel sheet, those are good ways to work on a timeline because you can insert facts, you can move fields around. You begin with whatever date you know and you work around it. You might not know a person's birth or death, and that's why you're doing a timeline to find it out. So whatever date you know, that's what you start with. You put events in the chronological order because even though in genealogy research, we're working backwards, when you're doing a timeline, you want to put it from start to finish. And always record names and birth dates as they are listed on the document. Even though you may think they're wrong, even though, oh, we don't spell our last name like that anymore. Always record it however it's listed on the document. And as I said, you want to add historical context because our ancestors didn't live in a vacuum. Fields to include are the year, the age of a person, the event, the location, and of course, always the citation and the source. Census records are like low-hanging fruit. You can find them in Family Search and National Archives. Those are free sites. There are also paid sites that have census records, like Ancestry and MyHeritage. But if you have a library card, most library systems have a library version of Ancestry and MyHeritage. So if you have a library card, you can go to a library and you can access records from there. Use your tax dollars. Go to the library. As I said, you start with a document or whatever information that you know. This is a picture of my great uncle Ned Washington. And I've always loved this picture. I just think he looks so distinguished. I don't know what year it was taken, but I love how distinguished he looks. What I know is that he's Granny's brother. Lucy Washington is my grandmother, AKA Granny. I know he's from Mississippi. His parents were Peter and Mary Washington. In my lifetime, he lived in Chicago, Illinois. And I know he was in the 1910 Holmes, Mississippi census because I had already done research on my grandmother and I saw him in that family unit in 1910. So this is a timeline that's just a shell, starting with what I think I know. So his birth date is about 1901, according to the 1910 census, because he was 9 years old. And if you subtract the 9 years from the date, then his birthday is about 1901. Again, it lists in that sense his parents, his siblings, and his paternal grandparents. I added as historical facts World War I and World War II because that probably affected his life. Maybe he served in the war, maybe he didn't. but that's a historical fact that I added to his timeline. I did this one as a Word document, and the fields are included are the date, age, location, event, and source. Now, right away, his birthday is July 17th, 1900. And I got this from his draft registration in Ohio, Ashtabula, Ohio. So here's his the census. I put the full date because in this census, he's 9 years old in 1910. So you think maybe he was born in 1901, but he was born just a few months after the census. And that's why I like to put the full date, because sometimes those matter of a couple of months makes a difference. I added the first great migration of African Americans from the South to the North, because maybe he was part of that. I added the selected service information as a historical fact. So here is his September 12th, 1980, 18. He was 18 years old in Ashtabula, Ohio. His draft registration with his contact person as his mother. Skipping to 1920, he was married and living in Ashtabula with his wife, his son, and his brother was also living with them. So I highlight in red questions that I want to research further. Like, when and where did they marry? What's Virginia's maiden name? Where was she from? In 1930, they had moved to Chicago. Well, when did they move to Chicago? Another thing that I want to look at. This is my basic spreadsheet. And I have the year, the date, the age, the event, like with the word, but I also separated out location. I added notes and to do. And the great thing about a spreadsheet is that you can add fields, you can take out fields, you can move things around. It's easy to manipulate information. So here's Uncle Ned on a spreadsheet. And the first couple of years are things that we already saw on the Word document. And right away, looking at this location, I can see his migration pattern. And it's interesting that in September of 1918, he was out of Mississippi and in Ashtabula, Ohio. But a few months later, he got married back in Holmes, Mississippi. Following year, he was back in Ashtabula, and that's where he lived for a while until he moved to Chicago. Now, looking at this, you might wonder in a couple of months about his movement from Ashtabula to Holmes and then back to Ashtabula. But on his draft registration card, his permanent address is listed as 5 FRD, Lexington, Holmes, Mississippi. And that's also the address of his contact person, his mother. His employer is New York Central Railroad in Ashtabula, Ohio. And I put in a note on his marriage that it was on a Tuesday. I looked up the date so that I know he didn't go, like hurry up and get married on the weekend or something and get back to work. He might have taken off to get married. But his home at that time, his physical home was actually in Ashtabula. So down at the bottom here, in the 1950 census, he is separated. He's living in Chicago. He's separated, living with his brother Gilbert, who was the head of the household, their father Peter, and a nephew, William. So my question is, did he and his wife get back together or did they divorce? So there's another record set that I can look at. He died in Chicago, and he's buried outside of Chicago in Worth, Illinois. So I have a note to call the cemetery for the exact burial date. Now, this is something that's a benefit of doing a timeline. I was able to write Uncle Ned's biography, and this is just partially what I wrote in his biography. Of course, it's where he was born and the date he was born. He was the third of 5 children. And when this 1900 census was taken on June 9th, Ned's parents were living with his father's parents. And baby boy Washington was weeks from coming into the world. And when he did, he was named after his paternal grandfather. Uncle Ned only completed the 5th grade, and I put it as a qualifier that the separate and unequal educational system in Mississippi, along with the family need for another worker on their rural farm, probably contributed to him only getting to the 5th grade. Ned and his siblings, Uncle Ned and his siblings, were part of the first Great Migration. As I said before, Southerners moved to the north for better educational opportunities, better housing opportunities, and a better way of life. Uncle Ned and his brother were working as laborers for the New York Central Railroad. And another shameless plug for the library. I love getting books on interlibrary loan. And I got several books on the history of Ashtabula, Ohio. And in one of the books, they said there were agents of the railroad who went to some southern states. Mississippi was one, and I think Alabama was another one. And they recruited Black men to work on the railroad. And they gave them incentives to come to Ashtabula. Okay, in the next paragraph, how many of you can picture in your mind that Uncle Sam poster pointing, "I want you," to join the army? That was popular in World War I. So Uncle Ned registered for the military when he was 18, but he wasn't called to service. He also registered for what was called the Old Man Draft during World War II, but once again, he wasn't called into service. In 1950, as I showed before, he was separated from his wife, living with his brother Gilbert, who was also separated. And also in the household was a 75-year-old widowed father, Peter, and their nephew, William Titus from Ashtabula, was also separated from his wife. And in doing this timeline for Uncle Ned, I found my great-grandfather, Peter, in Chicago, because I thought he was in Mississippi still. And unfortunately, with names like Ned Washington and Peter Washington, it's hard to find them unless you know the family unit. And that's why I started in 1910 looking for Uncle Ned and going forward instead of going backward, because I knew in 1950 he was in Chicago, or at least I thought he was in Chicago. But looking for Ned Washington in Chicago would have been like a needle in a haystack. Just like looking for Peter Washington alone in Chicago, unless you know the family unit. So that was a good thing about doing the timeline. Like I said, I found my great-grandfather, Peter. And another good thing, besides being able to do a biography or narrative when you have a timeline, is that you have all these papers related to this one person. So you can put them in a physical folder, you can put them in a computer folder, and there they are for you to pull out if you want to find something else about them, or if the research leads you to another point. So that's another way of cleaning up your files, doing a timeline. Now I want to show the ancestry does a timeline that you're probably all familiar with. On the left side, they have the facts, and it is just the facts. If you click on the life story, you'll get what's on the right part of the screen. And they try to do a little narrative, but it's not personal. And that's why I like doing a timeline myself. I like the personal aspect. Family Search also does a timeline. And again, it's just the facts. There are genealogy software programs that do timelines and reports and other things. And these are three of some of the most popular ones: Roots Magic, Legacy, and Family Tree Maker. And the thing is, for me, when you're doing a timeline and you're doing it and you're writing it or typing it, it sticks with you a little more than if you go someplace else and just can pull it up. So how do you add historical context? These three books are in your handout. But as you see, I'm more United States focused. So there are other books that have world histories and such. But these are three books. The first one on the left is something that I own myself, and it's a pocketbook. It's a small book, but it's chock full of facts. The other two books I have used at the library. You can also get timelines from places like the Family Search Wiki. You can get timelines on your state or your county. And for bigger places like Chicago, LA, like that, you can get timelines on a city. Wikipedia is another place where you can get timelines. And these are all different ways that you can add historical context to your timeline. Other resources for historical information online include state archives, local history museums and societies, libraries, both public and university. And of course, there's Google. Now, I do other types of family groupings besides individuals. And I'm going to show you one, starting with a paternal great-grandmother. My paternal great-grandmother, Mary Button, wrote this letter to the county clerk in Macon, Georgia. Dear Sir, will you please let me know if there's a record of the marriage of Mary Lane and Henry Button, both colored, in which the ages of the parties are given, and in parentheses is the date they married, December 24th, 1883. I am applying for old age assistance, and this is necessary for me to prove my age. Thank you, etc. So in this letter, I have where she's living in 1938. I have that she married and was living in Macon, Georgia in 1883. And since she's applying for old age assistance, at that time, the age for benefits was 65. So if you do some subtraction, her birth year might be 1873. So those are years I can work with. And this is the response they sent back. In remarriage of Henry Burton, and that's what's on the record, Henry Burton, colored. The record of this office show that the above parties were married December 28, 1883 by L.P. Goodwin, minister of gospel. Same is of record in Book of Marriages, D, folio 140. Parties applying for marriage license in this state were not required to give age until 1924. So now I have another local historical fact. So if I'm looking for any other relative in that area and I want to find out their age, I know I'm not going to find it on the marriage record. So, as I said, I did do other types of family timelines. And this one I did as a couple because I wanted to see where Henry Clay Button and Mary Lang could have met. Did they grow up as children? Did they meet someplace else along the line? I put Henry Button's information in blue and Mary's in red. And you see I have the same headings across the top except for location, which I included in the event. And it's also in the source. I put in historical facts, the Emancipation Proclamation. I put in when Congress created the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, which is commonly called the Freedmen's Bureau. And the 13th Amendment was ratified and slavery is abolished. I put that date in because with this information, I now have to look at different record sets if I want to find them before 1865. So the 1870 census, we know, is the first time formerly enslaved people were listed in family units with first names and last names. So Henry is 12, living at home, and Mary Button, her surname is Davis. She's in the household with Henrietta Davis, who is her mother, and Annie Davis, who is her sister. And they're living in Hancock, Georgia, whereas Henry is living in Bibb County, Georgia. So they didn't meet in 1870, probably. So in 1880, they are both living in Bibb County, Georgia. Henry's name is listed in that census as Clay Button, and he's a boarder. Mary's name is now Mary Lane instead of Mary Davis. Her mother is listed as Henrietta Lane and a widow. So my question is, when and why did the surname change for Mary and her family? Now, since Mary and Henry were married in 1883, I put down what age she could have been depending on what year she was born in. Now, that's a way to eliminate some of those birth years, because every single census, Henry's age is different, his birth year is different, and Mary's the same. Her age is different and her birth date is different. So I know she couldn't have been married in 1876 because she couldn't have been married at 7. She wasn't born in 1875, which is listed on her death certificate, because she would have been 8. Hopefully she did get married at 12. Maybe she got married at 16 or 20. So this is a way to compare and determine, because especially before birth certificates, death certificates, and vital records like that, you need a way to compare and evaluate what can be the correct information. Way down in 1900, there was a major flood in Macon, Georgia. And this was in a local newspaper, the Atlanta Constitution, on February 14th, 1900. And the lower portion of East Macon was flooded and great damage was done. So I put in my notes to research East Macon because that's where they're living at the time. See, the residents in the 1900 census was East Macon. So looking at Henry Button's occupation, he's a fireman, a laborer, a fireman, a laborer, but he worked at the Acme Brewing Company, you see up here in 1904. This information from 1904 through 1917, I got from the Macon, Georgia City Directory in the various years. So he's working for the Acme Brewing Company, and my to-do was to research the company. So briefly, one of the things I found that the Acme Brewing Company was one of the most successful businesses in the South. And I got that from the Digital Library of Georgia. So when it shows that he's a fireman in different years, he's not a fireman for the city, he's a fireman for the company. And in major companies like that, and in foundries, they have separate fire departments because if a fire does break out, they want to get to it quickly. They don't want to wait for the city or the county services, which will come, but they want to make sure they get to it quickly. I also included here as a local fact, January 1919 is when the statewide registration of births and deaths in Georgia began. So all of their children, their 5 daughters, were born before 1919. So I know not to look for a birth certificate for them. I might find other verification of birth records, but not a birth certificate probably. 1920, at the end here, is the last time that Henry Button and Mary Lane are together. Well, actually, they're not together. So that's why I put this down. Henry's residence is in Hawkinsville, Georgia, in the 1920 census. And he's listed as a boarder and a widow. Mary is still in Bibb County, and she's also listed as a widow. And this is where you take into account social history. At that time, it was really frowned upon to be divorced or to be separated. So a lot of times people put down that they were a widow instead of that. Now, I don't know yet if this is my Henry Button, and that's one of the things I put in the notes. And I want to know, did they divorce? Is there a record I can find on that? I know Mary probably wasn't a widow, and this could possibly be my Henry Button, because my cousin Bobby, who was my father's first cousin, said he remembers when Clay Button died in Georgia because his mother went to the funeral, and cousin Bobby was like 12 or 13, he said. So that would mean that Henry Button died around 1943 or 1944. And you have to take things like that too, whatever stories you hear from your family, and you have to incorporate that in your timeline and in your research. Now, this is a different type of chart that I did and timeline for William Turner Williams and Mary Jane Clark. And I did this because almost every record of them, their name is different. And they had 15 children. So a way to keep track of them was through the children, basically. Even though all 15 children didn't live together at the same time with their parents. So in 1900, they were Turner and Jane. 1910, again, they were Turner and Jane. 1920, they were W.T. and Mary Jane. In bold, in 1900, 1910, and 1920 is my grandfather. And you see his name, William Willie Francis. If you look in the location here, they're pretty constant on where they lived. But in 1900 and 1910, they lived with Etheridge Jones, Georgia. And in 1920, they lived in Lester Jones, Georgia. And I put in the notes the distance to see, Was it reasonable that they could have moved to a different place? In 1930, they're back in Etheridge Jones, Georgia, and it's W.T. and Mary J. 1940 is Turner and Mary Jane. In 1950, William T. Williams is living with his daughter and her husband. And I put in the notes that Mary Jane died November 3rd, 1948 in Macon. So this is a way for me to keep track of them because, like I say, their names changed almost every record. And the constant was their children. And I have an obituary notice, newspaper obituary notice for William Turner Williams, which lists all 15 of his children. So that helped me knowing his children, being able to chart him. Now I want to know about William Turner Williams at a young age. And the earliest census he was in is the 1870 census. He's in the household of Jackson Williams. Also in that household is a William Williams, age 13. This is my great-grandfather, Turner Williams, age 13. But remember, his name is William Turner Williams. And that's probably why they called him Turner Williams at this time, not to confuse him with William Williams. Well, I didn't want to confuse them either as I was doing my research because they're both the same age. So I did a comparison chart. William Turner Williams versus William Williams. In 1870, they were both living in the household of Jackson Williams. I later found out that John W. Williams is William Turner Williams' father and Annie is his mother. William Williams, he was in the household of Jackson Williams, who was applied his father. Lucy was applied as his mother, and they were indeed his parents. So I did the census on where they were living during different times, different census years. So I can tell this is my William Turner Williams, opposed to this being my William Williams. And sometimes when you have same people names like that, you have to do a comparison chart to make sure you're on the track of the right person. Now, I wanted to know more, like I say, about young William Turner Williams. So this is a project that I'm starting now, and it's on the families in Pope Jones, Georgia. Here you see Turner Williams in the household of Jackson Williams, and he's living close to Austin Clark. And remember, Turner Williams' wife's maiden name is Clark. There are a lot of my paternal family surnames in Pope Jones, Georgia. So I wanted to do this chart. I did from 1870, 1880, 1900, 10, and 20, because I want to find out more about the community. So I just wanted to show you that briefly. I pulled this timeline on Rosa Parks because I want to show you another way that you can do timelines. And this is the type of timeline that people often do for family reunions, 50th wedding, anniversary celebrations. And they put pictures in and graphics in. So this is another way. I'm not a very graphic, picture-y type of person, but this is another type of timeline that you can do. So in summary, timelines help you evaluate if facts fit together, if they make sense. You always have to make sure that sources are reliable. And even like with my cousin Bobby as a source, I can work around that to see if what he said is indeed true. Is there a logical explanation for discrepancies? And it can help you resolve conflicts. As I said before, if you have two people with the same name in the same place, If you do a timeline, you can see which one is your person. Timelines with historical context, I think, add flavor to the story because your ancestor is more than just names and dates and places. Things happened around them. Tell their story. You can access local resources online or in person and take advantage of that. And read local historical newspapers. If I hadn't read that local newspaper, I wouldn't have known about the Macon flood. And that's, something interesting to know since my family lived in that area. And always, always, always reach out to the genealogy community. They've been very, very helpful to me. And genealogists and family historians are just a bunch of helpful people. Any questions?